Hello, my name is Joanna Leśnierowska, and I'm a member of Performance, Conservation, Materiality Knowledge Research Project, and this is Two Questions. It's a series of interviews in which we pose two fundamental questions to a variety of experts who work with, in, and on performance and conservation. Today, I have a pleasure to host not one, but two experts. Let me introduce to you Karen Helen Schaffman and Peter Pleyer. Karen is a dance artist, feminist, professor, program director, curator, and Feldenkrais practitioner. Dancing is for her a transformative and transgressive force for self-awareness and political change. Since 2001, she's been fostering dance studies program at California State University, San Marcos, on the traditional lands of the Luiseño Payom Cavicum people. Karen is committed to the exchange of knowledge by honoring individual experiences in a respectful collective container. Her early technical training is based in the Euro-American traditions of ballet and modern and Black dance forms of jazz and modern. A pivotal point in her movement perspective arose at European Dance Development Center in Arnhem, Netherlands, where she studied between 1989 and 1991. There, she dove deeply into improvisation, experimental composition, and somatic research. Her interest in the context of dance, history, and sociopolitics through cultural studies, she was developing at the University of California, Riverside, earning her PhD degree in 2001 with a dissertation focusing on a contact improvisation and identity. She got certified in the Feldenkrais method in 2016, and she welcomes the endless practice of somatic awareness as individual, cultural, and political phenomenon. Peter, after some years as an actor in the German theater, he also studied dance and choreography at the European Dance Development Center in the Art Academy of Arnhem, exactly in the same years as Karen. Since then, he has worked closely with Hungarian dancer Este Gal, and their choreographies and improvisation have been shown in Holland, Germany, Hungary, Paris, and at the New York Improvisational Festival. Since the year of 2000, Peter lives in Berlin. His strong artistic interest goes to new methods of training dance and composition, where improvisation plays a central role. Out of his interest in the newly developing dance research in different universities, he developed the lecture performance choreographing books, based on his view of the difference in the dance research in the United States and Europe, and how that can be beneficial for dancer and choreographer. Another workshop of his that he teaches internationally is History in Practice, and it focuses strongly on the post-Judson avant-garde. From 2007, for 8 editions, Peter was an artistic director of Tanztage Berlin. And in the years 2012 until 2014, he worked also in the programming team of Sophiensaale in Berlin. He was a guest professor at HZT University of Arts Berlin in the academic year 2015-16. In 2014, Peter has successfully picked up his choreographic career with the Solo Ponderosa trilogy that was also presented at Live Legacy project co-curated by Karen Schaffman and presented in Tanzhaus NRW and also at Impulse Dance Festival in Vienna. Then came the group research and choreography Visible Undercurrent in 2014 and 16, and the show Cranky Bodies Dance Reset in 2017. His solo Triton Tanz, Twisted Trident of 2019 treats the history of release technique, deconstructing masculinity and the death of Peyer's father. In 2020, in a short break between two corona lockdowns, Peyer, together with his partner, fashion designer and visual artist Michiel Kuiper, has founded the Cranky Bodies, a company, with the aim of developing a practice of improvised group performances that would bridge the dance versus fine arts division. Hello, Karen. Hello, Peter. Thank you for the time you found to join us and share your thoughts answering our two questions. And the two questions are, can performance be conserved? And if yes, how? If not, why not? And the second question is, what does it mean to conserve performance?
Hello from Berlin. I'm sitting here in front of an artwork. I'm wearing a white t-shirt. I'm a gray-haired, middle-aged, male, reread person with glasses, so I can clearly see you. This question can be answered in a very clear way or in many different aspects. I think there are aspects in performance that can and should be conserved. And I think there is technical means to do so with photographs and videos, and there's descriptions of performances, like writings about performances, witnesses that write about performances. And in my experience, the best is always when there's multiple sources that you can access to, like re-experience performance. And I would add, in my way, in my profession, it's mainly dance performances. And I think, on the other hand, there is aspects of performance that cannot be conserved and should not be conserved, which are the elements of the live gathering of people as they are together witnessing the performance. And within that, of course, is a kind of a mood of the day, weather, time of the day. There's several aspects of live performance that cannot be conserved and should not be conserved, because there is a value in also this non-conservation.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Schaffman. I am here in San Diego County, North County, San Diego, in a town called San Marcos. And I will also acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Payom Cowicham people and the Kumeyaay people. California, we're very mindful about locating ourselves on the land. So just take a moment for that. Since Peter did an audio description of for people who are visually impaired, I will also share with that. I'm a white woman, 61 years old, and in my kitchen, I'm wearing a black t-shirt, and the screen only shows me from the clavicles up. Curly hair and blue eyes, and a floppy green blowing tree is behind me. So thank you. This question, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm delighted. I feel it's another opportunity to be in a reunited space together, even though it's virtual. I can feel something. And that is always an interesting thing when talking about what we're conserving right now, possibly. And so it's a delight to be here. And in the context of this trio. So maybe we get down that rabbit hole later. And as soon as the questions came up, and I did listen to your interview, I went right to the definitions, and that was really fun and problematic, and then opened up this whole like tunnel of places for me to enter into the conversation because um, we're speaking English. It is my first language. And then I'm speaking English via the United States dialect, we could call it that. And so that just brought up some really fun research for me. And I got into this question for myself is like, well, conservation and then versus preservation, because in the US, conservation of art is really delegated, at least to this museum world as I know it. And that in dance, we're really talking about like we have dance preservation, this dance heritage organization and things like that. So then I was really thinking about the project and who's I always say when I teach who's in the room. So we're always acknowledging who we're conserving. It's even to say that sounds very strange for me as a speaker and as a dance artist. But what are the institutions that are doing this kind of work? So that's just, we all know that who are in this project, but I just think that needs to be magnified. And then I looked up these two words, and the first thing that came up was food in terms of, and I think it's a very British connotation of you have conserves or preserves. And so I got really into this conundrum, but then it really set it up for me nicely. Whereas preserves are kind of artificially preserved because you have to add sugar, and then you have the whole history of sugar, right? And so it's basically a big problem, right? Sugar in our world that's artificially created and all of that politics around that. But then when you have conserves, if that's how they even say it, it's just really the fruit and then with dried fruit. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, that is in a way, if I might say, organic. And so I really think the idea when we're talking about dance and performance is that this live element is so important that Peter already spoke to, and that we can't really ever, if it's live art, at least, that we can't really ever, we have these artifacts, these relics, these archives, and how we want to work with them, and then how do we want to carry them forward through time as artworks, but that we can't really ever conserve them because we're always in the world of the now, the contemporaneous, and all of that. So I think it's a really exciting topic, and so I'm very excited about that. I also was thinking when I was looking up language about conservation versus preservation. So, and then I looked that up because in the US, again, talking from my vantage point right now, I looked up something and it was talking about how in federal institutions, we conserve natural places like Yosemite National Park and the redwood trees. But for buildings and cultural institutions, that's a preservation thing. So I was also really interested in, I don't know, I had a good time with it. So thank you for that invitation. And then, everything around sustainability and the world and everything that's going on in the world, so that the work of, the historical moment is obvious, but it's also just has to keep kind of getting unpeeled. So that's where I was thinking about that. And then I was thinking, I'll just say a few more and then pass it back to Peter and keep it moving, is that, who are our institutions? And then who are the people who are doing something maybe different? And so I was thinking about a few people who, the dancers who are doing the work, not the dance scholars, but the dancers, especially how important that is, that they're in these conversations of how we go forward. And then I was thinking about Corey Ollinghouse. Do you know Corey? Okay, so for the viewers, or so Corey actually, I worked with Corey when she was 16. She used to take some classes with lower left, so I met her very young. So I kind of always follow what she's doing, and she's doing something called Living Archives, and she works with the Trisha Brown Dance Company. And she's really finding a creative way to work with this idea But I also love that I stumbled upon that she had a workshop recently called Rethinking Performance Agreements. And that is then working with the live artists and then them having the agency to find ways that their work goes into these, maybe, I don't know if we're talking about the museum, but it seems like the museum has been very prominent in the project, even though I don't know a lot about the project. So I'll pass it over to Peter and see what's next.
Okay, next to the museum, I think we're also talking archives, and that I do in this respect think that it is important to like leave traces of performance work and dance work in archives, and these can be personal archives or archives in institutions. Because of course the power of live performance, live dance performance is that at the moment we experiencing it, and when it's done, it's over. But there is this aspect of how many people see that work then. And I know from my work, or from any of the dance works here in Berlin, it's hundreds, it's not even thousands of people that see work. And then with the whole new generation of feminist researchers and queer researchers and people of color researchers that really can dig into archives of things that have been done, have been performed, have been seen before, that didn't get acknowledged yet, that there's a whole bunch of material that's still waiting to be discovered. And even if I go in little archives for myself or find books that not a lot of people read, I'm kind of like, oh, this is very interesting, and it kind of passes on and further into making a whole rhizome network of informations that come along. And yeah, I'm reading this book now on Simon Forti that a researcher from Australia has done, and that most of the fine arts references for Simone are in footnotes of other artists. So her work is not put forward in the fine arts work, but in the footnotes of other artists having done workshops with her in the 60s. It's for me very touching that people do these kind of researches and finding these conserved traces in interviews of having experienced. So this multitude of voices to describe or see or discover that are still available, and I hope will be more available for people.
I think there's going to be well, Peter brought up diversity of identity, and I think that's here where I am working and in the institution I work in, a university, it's really always who's speaking for whom. And so this is a big moment of who's representing who. And so the idea of who's in the room is always very important too, when these spaces, and that's where these live artists. And then we're in this time where so many traditional kinds of, the idea that what I'm thinking right now, the idea of what can be, what's calling to be conserved right now, and how important that is for so many people as well, in terms of so many indigenous people whose things can just disappear very quickly as language just keeps getting lost in terms of that. So the work, as Peter said, is very, very very important. And again, and who gets those opportunities or not is one thing, and then people finding their own voices towards that. Yeah, So it's like, who has the responsibility, the authority, the economics, and all that is always underneath everything. I don't know if we want to go there, but I think I keep turning to the people. The other, besides my own work or work that Peter and I have shared, or we all have shared, there's something that that I was thinking about with this project too. For some reason, I recently was thinking about, and I don't really know him personally. You might even know him as Jurek Konjar, is that how I say his name? From Slovenia's work, who was working with Steve Paxton, who recently passed. And I got to see, Paxton perform several times and got to work with him as Peter did in Arnhem. But when I saw Jurek perform, it brought up what this keeps going back to in terms of the institutions and everything, is this like responsibility, like where there's so much responsibility in a world where everything can be co-opted. Like I work in university, and these students just sometimes they're doing these projects and they're just pulling up the TikTok videos. And okay, and then those are authored, and there's just so many layers right now. But then there's this idea of being in the room, that nothing can replace that with dance. The more I love dance, I care about dance, and I feel the importance of that transmission. And there's thousands of dialects of dance, but like when I watched the performance of Jurek doing Steve Paxton's work, I just was kind of mind blown. There was just so much care taken in terms of the dialogue and being in the space at a particular time when the knowledge could be passed. And then it's like, how is it passed? It's still not the same body, but it can't be, but there is still a kind of refinement. And that really had to do with like a codification for me, almost of style. I don't know, I'm saying that out loud for the first time, where I'm sure I'm not the first person, but there's the codification of style versus the codification of vocabulary. But then how to define vocabulary, but in so much of contemporary work, and I will say I use the word traditional very broadly and in quotes, that you can't, have this kind of conservation at a certain level because of the signature style, but how that is cared for or what is important that is transmitted over time has to do with these the depth of dialogue and research, like Peter was talking about, like the traces and all of the things you can maybe find in footnotes that maybe weren't brought forward, especially in dance.
Very interesting that you actually brought forward a case of Yuri Konjar and his collaboration with Steve Paxton. I say very consciously collaboration because his reenactment of especially Goldberg variations, one of the seminal works of Steve, which is actually a piece of improvisation to Goldberg variations of Bach. This was really done in a direct dialogue also with Steve. I mean, they did maintain an ongoing contact, and Yuri after also went into dancing in different reenactments of Steve's work, and I know firsthand because I had a pleasure to invite Yuri many times also and speak about it with him and seen his version of Goldberg variations also several times in different contexts. So I know that Steve has been seeing in him expressis verbis himself at a young age. So that's also a very interesting question of transmission of the as you say, style, but also I say a set of strategies in these particular terms, improvisational strategies and scores and ideas and attitudes, but also a certain spirit that the artist himself recognized in this young body from a totally different cultural context, because Yuri comes from Slovenia, from Ljubljana, and Steve is American, and the several generations apart between the two of them, that is actually also a very interesting question of, yeah, what we do really preserve. And in that term, I started recently to think a lot about reactivation. And that actually comes more to discussing the practices than the particular works of art. I mean, for me, especially when we talk about the vast field of improvisational practices and generally several practices stemming from the postmodern times, 60s and 70s, we do talk a lot about practices rather. And I know both of you are kind of busy in your own practices to reach out to this rich abundance of practices that has been before you, that has been passed on you, transmitted by your teachers and by the contexts also where you come from. Yeah, because you, Karen, you're in California, in America, you are raised in the very strong modern dance tradition. Peyer, you come from Germany, where actually over last decades, the topic of reaching out to a dance history, the Ausdruckstanz history, and a very difficult political also aspect of Ausdruckstanz, expressionist dance involved, has been researched very extensively through a dance archaeology movement and grants that has been issued. But the thing is that when it comes to practices, we really do question what's their agency, what's their active part, and how we can reactivate them so they gain back their impact that they had on artists, on creators, on audiences. I wanted to actually hear from you, how do you deal with this ideas and topics of bringing back, reactivating practices from past? Where do you find relevance of that? And how do you incorporate this in your own work?
I can maybe speak about the project Visible Undercurrent from 2014, which came about my experiencing the Berlin dance scene and dance history with a lot of undercurrents of practices that people have not acknowledged, but it is there. I see it in the pieces, and I wanted to put some light on it with the knowledge that I had from my education and from dealing with historical figures in the dance from like the last 20, 30 years. But what I did was I did bring a lot of different resources like videos, DVDs, but also Contact Quarterly, the dance magazine from 1975 until recently, that that allowed younger dancers to dive into kind of a more of a field of ideas with protagonists, and I kind of ask them what is resonating with you today, which artist or which score or which aesthetic or is close to you or would know more from. And I let the 4 dancers that I worked with for this project really go freely with the inspiration of these videos or written accounts or critics that were in newspapers or even what they found online now. And I do remember that when Moore Demer saw the first time Cranky Destroyers, a piece by Stephanie Skura, online to Beethoven's music, she came back to rehearsals and said, "Oh my God, why is nobody making work like this anymore?" And she really saw a kind of structure in the piece, but also the material that came out of Skinner releasing images that then she was really taken by it. And I said, "Stephanie is still alive. You can write her." And she wrote her, and Stephanie denied her to copy material from the DVD or from the accounts on video, but she said, "Here are the scores that we use. Make your own material with it." So there, it was really sweet and humble, and then yeah, Moore made new material with these scores that Stephanie said were the scores for this piece, Cranky Destroyers. So I think there's really many different ways and creative ways to pick and choose and look into this material on also very we're talking also about very complexity within the work that is not easily conserved in one shot or one idea. It really has all these angles that could be looked at or described at if you wanted to preserve it.
I love to hear that aspect that Stephanie said no, but you make your own. And I think that again has to do with so much of, certain practices around, I love the word reactivation, is like, what are we reactivating? What is it? And what is it now? But it's kind of like something that's, I'm going to just use the word for lack of a better one right now. It's like essential. What's the essence, or the Euros, the gestalt, the undercurrent, I guess, right, Peter?
Yeah.
The undercurrent is the person, but it's also like the philosophy, the values. What are we creating here? What are we working with? What are we working with, especially in maybe in experimental improvisational work? And so these scores that we do or that we make work from, the choreographies, what is essential to come forward out of them. And so I love that she's asked more to make her own instead of just saying, here, you can just cut and paste onto your body what you can see off a 2-screen, flat screen video. Like, what is going on here and how do we know? And so how do we know? And that has to do with, like Peter said, these multiple aspects of things you can draw from. You've got the photos, you've got interviews, you've got the time, the zeitgeist of the time. Where were they? Where was a choreographer, for example, situated politically? How did that influence the work or not? Or their identity, or everything. So I think that's just so beautiful. I think I can just jump in a little bit because I would say the last decade, I'm not actually, unfortunately, making work. I'm more of an observer, dramaturg, and curator. So I shouldn't say unfortunately, it's been a great decade. Looking forward to making some work. So I'll just sort of add that, especially inspired by some of this interview. And that I did this project that was directed and I was invited by Angela Guerrero called the Live Legacy Project. So it was an attempt to draw some lines and create some archives that were around conversations of the transmission of some of the European schools and how things it transmitted from New York, a certain time in New York that was also came maybe from the West Coast through New York, or maybe came from other people into the American consciousness, the US consciousness, that brought forward some of these experimental ideas that came from many cultures, not just European concepts, even though they were primarily seen on white people in the 60s in New York, and that how those came through and how they came through England and over the school with Mary O'Donnell, and then onto the Amsterdam model of what is an education, and then from that school, the branch out into Arnhem, and then all of that Arnhem happening when so much fell down and crumpled in Europe. And when we were at the school, since and Peter's working in Germany, I mean, it was a time, I was 19, I was there from 89 to 91. So yeah, it's really these transmissions over the time and the place, and then suddenly they're here. And then Peter, your work is so thoughtful, even the way of working with the concepts of, wow, we see all of these things, but many choreographers don't really know where some of those threads are woven into the fabric of this transcontinental, national, global dance way of being in the world.
And I wanted to ask you now about your personal strategies. How do you work with history, and what are your strategies, your practices? What does it mean to you personally and to your daily work to conserve to preserve performance?
For me, the relevance or the practice or the tactic is twofold, because one is my general ongoing love for books, and that like actually building a sort of library by finding books and getting books and diving into other bodies of with pages that has written or pictorial content is something that is very dear to me, and keeps inspiring me, and keeps also in teaching that that there's always a book to bring or two books to bring, and that have a relevance with each other, to each other, maybe 3 books or 5 books or an article. I don't know, this is an ongoing fascination within my work. The other more recent work is through the collaboration with my partner Michiel Kuiper, that goes into more the fine arts direction, with a lot of photographing and also video, but mostly photograph, to also have a kind of an aesthetic output that is beyond the performance, but it is a work by itself, to have a good visual photo that is speaking of the work. And then within that, there is I love maybe the photo more than the video, because the snapshot of a moment, you can then in a text or in an explanation describe all the layers that are in the picture. I like how this is doing the layering with the camera even, but to describe the layering of that one moment, of that one shot, and then you can get very specific in terms of content, or what is it that you're actually seeing. These are the maybe the two aspects that still keep fascinating me in the preservation or in the archiving of my own work, but also of other people's work that I also collect in a way. That the books are really from the beginning on very special, and it really brings me back to Karen. Even now I'm telling this story over and over again, this interest in reading about dance, and also even like really hunting a few of the books that are hard to get, or were hard to get in the beginning of the like 2000 or 99 or 98, is because Karen used to be in one of the first PhD programs for dance research with Susan Foster, and you would always send me your reading lists that you would have to read. And I was really, just from the list, I was like, oh my God, there's this book. Oh my God, there's this book. I should make effort to get my hands on this and read this book. And so there's a real nice connection at the moment also with Karen and me through that book love.
What do you find in those books particularly? What triggers this love? And it's an ongoing process. You made already even 2 choreographic works with the books, on the books and with the books. What's there? What do you find in reading about history, be it memoirs or the theoretical or historical reports?
I think one aspect is how am I relating to what I'm reading? Can I feel what they felt? Can I or put it in my world? Can I find it in my world? Or is it very far from my world? And that's interesting too. But I think the aspect of having 2 or 3 or 4 books with different content together on the table, that is very exciting. And then not to read a book from cover to the end, but to go through, and which part of the book might resonate with which part of this other book, or which image is actually the image that could also be in the other book. More of the, yeah, this how things come together and how they being pulled apart. I think that is more what interests me.
That's wonderful. It really made me think when you I'm thinking now of Susan Foster's book on kinesthetic empathy, because it's really like if people who are dancers or are dancing still, like how do we climb in with our own experience, our kinesthetic knowledge, to be making these choices, which is very different than the distance of the scholar who doesn't practice, so to speak. Not that there's anything wrong with that, no criticism there, but there is something very different. And then there's the people who come really purely, maybe not schooled in how it is to be a scholar, but they bring all this embodied knowledge, and the embodied knowledge is becoming more and more recognized, but it's still a thing, at least where I work. And so I think Peter's experience and love of books is just so beautiful. Just I can just see you with like, you're working with Simone Forti, and then there's 4 different books about her, and then there's also her big volume, right, of her drawings and her direct perspective. And then as somebody who's studied with her or with whoever we're talking about or are trying to conserve, quotes were in there as well, how we bring forward our own like empathy because we know something through our own experience. And so and then it's just really calling it what it is. I mean, maybe that's just very obvious, but that not saying we're an authority in a very particular way, we're coming from our own experience. And I just think in terms of curation and as the world goes forward, like the positionality of authorship is just more and more important, and the co-authorship is more and more important to recognize. So yeah, that's beautiful. So I was thinking about kinesthetic empathy. And then I was thinking again, because like at least in the last 10 years, I've been doing more less. I mean, I am making when I'm dramaturg. I am a maker. I'm like sitting out making some decisions or helping people come to some decisions about where they want to go with work. And I just think that has something to do with also with like, how is it activating on my own body, even if I just step out to move for like 3 minutes, even though they've danced for an hour. But if I'm gonna, that kind of exchange is physical, it's embodied, it's different when it's in the room. And then so I get really excited about that. Recently interviewed Nita Little, who for the audience is one of the beginning at the baseline contact improvisation alongside Steve Paxton and Nancy Stark Smith, alongside, I will say. So I was invited to interview Nita for the New York Public Library. It has an extensive collection of audio and visual and archival things. It's wonderful. It's so exciting to be there. So that interview was so interesting because it came down to it was she needed a couple more hours. And then how did we, there was like a prescription of how we're going to do this. We're going to start from the beginning. We're not going to bounce around. It's not going to be nonlinear. We're going to start from what Nita can remember at the beginning. And so with the library, they asked me to organize the questions and the interview accordingly. And so that was really interesting and a challenge. But then what revealed itself was that one section of history needed to be it needed to be like 3 years needed to have a whole interview. So we added one. And then it's again something about the adaptability of working with the artist and what's important for them to be heard that maybe they never had a platform for. So that was really exciting. I feel very honored and interested to do more interviews like that. I'm hoping to do one with Nina Martin soon. But we might be doing that alongside her watching. So like kind of an audio description of watching her read her own work. But anyway, the project I also wanted to share in this conversation is I just, well, I didn't just finish. It's going to start getting out into the world. So I've created a film, a co-edited film with a project that I collaborated on with Anya Cloud called Think Gravity Dance Project. And it was conceived during the pandemic. But we had a symposium in 2022, which I can't believe was 2 years ago already. And it was celebrating and reckoning with 50 years of contact improvisation. And so, but it was really contextualizes through these idea of what in some circles in the US we call the double pandemic of COVID-19, but also the pandemic of racial injustices. And so that we, even though we were two white women, we were creating a space where people of color could come forward and tell their experiences of contact improvisation. And what really emerged from that project was it was 6 days. Ishmael Houston Jones was there, and Ishmael is very much active in their own work as a choreographer, and I think Ishmael is 71 now, don't quote me on that, in the early 70s, really making work, and they had just come out of working with a piece with Keith Hennessy at the time, a collaborative piece. And it was recent that their untitled duet came out with Fred Holland. So this piece called, it's double titled, it's untitled duet, and I need to check my notes to make sure I get it right for the record. Oogala, OO-GA-LA. So maybe you've seen this piece about wrong contact. And so this piece was kind of not widely seen until fairly recently. And so the symposium, Ishmael presented on the first day, well, first Karen Nelson presented, and then Ishmael had a whole afternoon session. And so it kind of became the baseline for the next 5 days of like, what is, to even say wrong contact, or who wants to, people who's wearing their shoes in the space, because they did this piece in combat boots. And then it was played during we did a durational performance, like a 8-hour performance. And so that looped at one point in the space. And so that week had a lot to do with how do we historicize contact improvisation, and that's something that was what I actually wrote my dissertation on way back when. And so who is invisibilized in terms of the history, and what kind of influences do they have, and who feels comfortable in the room. And so it was very beautiful. So the film is coming out, Recollect, and that was also a process of trying to figure out how to co-edit, because why are we were at the point with Tara Knight, an amazing filmmaker. We interviewed every single person at the symposium, but we featured the others, but every single, even if it was a student, everybody was interviewed, and almost everybody has been transcribed already. The other person who was there was Daryl Jones, who's does their own work, but also worked with the B.B. Miller Company. And Daryl has a solo called Clutch, and Daryl's using the archives of his father, who's a Black, he died as, was a philosophy professor. I'm sorry, I have to look up what school. I'll get back to that. And he made a solo to his father's, he was responsible for his father's archives, so he's listening to his father's lectures. So there was this kind of layering the whole week of using archive, using history, but then also people in the room who, were new to contact improvisation. There was only 20 of us, but it was predominantly people of color space. And so just a lot was said. And when it came down to editing the film, there was a moment where it was like, yeah, from our identities as white women, we're going to step back and invite invited participants who are people of color to do the next level of editing. So it's really was a very multi-vocal archival piece.
I said already in the introduction that this is not an accident or a coincidence that I asked you two to be together in this rather shared talk around the topic than one-on-one interview, because we already learned that you have been studying together in Arnhem a very relevant and specific spot. I don't know if you agree with me, because I wanted to make a statement that following also Peter's work and understanding what Arnhem, especially back 20 years, 30 years ago, meant for the artistic growth, development, choreographic development, I can feel that in a way it put a mark on both of you and many other artists that went through this education. And then I wanted to ask you whether you feel that through being in the same school together, meeting very special artists, and it was a brand new concept also, no, or new school. So profiting from the fact that it was in the making, it was not yet super established. So maybe could introduce a lot of experimental approaches or different way of thinking about dance education than in other places. Do you feel that one of the underscores of your long life artistic practice became being a transmitter, being responsible, feeling responsibility for passing the baton, what you have learned? You have a privilege to work directly with many protagonists of 60s postmodern dance, and then artists active in America in 80s, which I consider, of course, a huge privilege that is not anymore possible to many of young people studying choreography and dance nowadays in Europe. So is there anything like this common understanding somewhere there as an underscore that follows you, or that you follow in any project you do, to always remember that this transmission is also a kind of a duty and maybe a service to a history and to the future?
In my case, I can say that this is definitely true, especially because I really don't want to keep it for myself. I need to give and share information or context or ideas that are from that period, but also how they morphed through times to maybe younger people, but that it's not only this kind of older younger, it's more in general, that I do think a lot of what has been taught there in these schools is not common knowledge yet in any of the institutions or in any other circles. Maybe aspects of that, but in this totality of the somatic approaches, but also the rigorous dancing and the rigorous composing. And I think maybe one of the main features of that is the heterogeneity, like a lot of different things that people brought that made it one thing, and then that it was mainly artists who came to teach. It wasn't teachers, it wasn't didactic, it wasn't thought into a line, it was just maybe raw, the artist's practice, and we had to struggle with this. But I think it's really the best school that I had in this aspect of there can be many voices that lead to good dancing. It's not one way to do it.
Oh, yes, it was, it always will be who, it's very much part of my identity as a dancer, is that experience that I had by working with people. And as Peter said, this raw state, everyone was experimenting, even though they were there to teach. So many teachers were there. All the teachers were invited. The premise was for their own research, whether it was choreographic or anatomical research or sensorial research. And politics came and went in different ways in the room, depending on who was there. And it was just an extraordinary opportunity. I just feel so lucky having arrived to that place at that particular time. And I think there's something, well, I bring that into the pedagogy that I teach, and I created a program. It's still a minor, it's on its way to being a major, but so, you know, the idea of what was extraordinary about Arnhem, and I came with some traditional Euro-American training that was based in ballet, modern jazz kind of stuff, and very rigorous training since childhood. But at the school, like more than half the school didn't come with like a lot of people didn't come with training. They came from just all different walks of life for all sorts of reasons. And so the experiment was a kind of who gets to be a dancer. Like everybody had this opportunity, even though it was like this Euro, and you could contextualize the privilege around that. But what was really amazing in there is that it was just a constant state of discovery that was very much based on physical language. And so the physicality of it was just on a level of depth, you know, that in order to have that in today's world for young people, it takes a lot economically and physically to get them there and all of this. I mean, I also have other somatic training. I have a certification in Feldenkrais, which I could only afford because I had a university job, but that was also another depth of training. And then, of course, it's just the depth of learning through making work, as Peter is doing with choreography. And so it does not, you have to be in the institution, but that space that we had to just be really messy. I mean, it was messy. That school was really, really messy. I mean, there was some really hard times and beautiful times, and it was a lot going on. And but it's extremely abundant in creativity and yeah, depth of exploration. And I think that the faculty who got invited at the time were able to have a certain kind of, it was like an extended retreat for them to do their work. And it was like an extended residency.
But there's also another reason that I wanted you two to meet here with me. And that actually brings me to a project that in which you also met somehow in a very beautiful way, and which is actually tapping into a situation in which we are not able to get in direct touch with our ancestors or former professors and artists. What happens when the distance, time distance, or lack of knowledge about the artist is pulling us apart, and when actually imagination and speculation comes at play. And I tap here to a project around Veronika Blumstein, a very special choreographer that actually both of you has been deeply researching. Peter was part of the team of artists, Polish and German, that actually brought back Veronika in a very particular way into a limelight, into the consciousness. Can you please talk a little bit, both of you, from your perspective and experience of work with and on the Veronika Blumstein oeuvre? It's a very beautiful project, and I think it needs to stay and be voiced, and everybody needs to hear this story, because it also brings a lot and adds a lot into a discussion about the relevance of this kind of investigating past and bringing it into the now and hopefully into the future as well.
The myth of when something comes alive is the birth myth, the birth myth. of
Origin story, maybe, but I like birth myth. That's good.
Of Veronika Blumstein is, of course, a little bit of a sad story. I don't know, but we were invited through Polish and German institutions to have a meeting with choreographers we were invited from German and Polish institutions to have a meeting with choreographers from both countries, and each could bring an artist of their choice. So we were, at the end, we were 12 people and a German and a Polish moderator, and I was the German moderator. Within the first 2 days, we understood we're coming from very different historical places. It was 2005. And there was a big danger that that meeting would be unsuccessfully dissolved and everybody would just go home. And then we were sitting together and discussing what if there would have been a Polish choreographer that immigrated to Poland and went to New York and had met all of these incredible people from the postmodern era. And we fantasized around that in such a way that it could actually be true. And suddenly everybody from Poland and from Germany and from the different arts was involved in what work would she make today? What work what could she have done then and we could recreate? And it unleashed a creativity that was enormous and a joy of be creative together and invent works that had historical context for this fictitious choreographer. And that became so successful that two big festivals, the Bremen Dance Festival and K3 in Hamburg for the opening, actually invited Veronica Blumstein to conduct a festival and to open the new choreographic center. So the new choreographic center, K3 in Hamburg, was actually opened by Veronica Blumstein. And the artists around that, and then additionally scholars from different ways. And that's when Karen came into the project also. Were invited to even produce theory, produce written work about Veronica. And that took on a whole world suddenly that Veronica was part of. And when we prepared this talk and we talked a little bit was, is she still alive, Karen?
Yes, I believe she is definitely alive today. And Peter gave a wonderful way to contextualize her from that project. I learned so much, and it brought me to places that I hadn't been to or explored or thought about. And I was just really, really honored to be brought in. I also really felt this sense of, and your last question was about responsibility. What's the responsibility? What's the ethics of what it is, what we do with Arnhem and with these histories? And as somebody who's really interested in being a dance historian, scholar, but also like first I'm a dancer and always dance artist first. And but that project brought so many things together in so many ways. And I got to deal with certain things around my own cultural identity that, that's why I was like, yo, she's still alive. She's really having a hard time. She's in New York, and yeah, she's on the line. So that project, I also wanted to bring up with that project because that project also shattered because I had done so much research on contact improvisation, and then I don't know I think it's a he as name, but Emil Hrvatin. I don't know if I said that right, but who has a new name?
Janusz Janza.
Was that Janusz?
Janusz Janza.
Janusz Janza. So they presented and they completely blew me away. I can't remember if it was the first festival or second, Peter. It was the first, right? In Bremen.
It was in Bremen, yeah.
They gave a whole talk about contact improvisation that really was like, you Americans think you know, you're the only one doing radical art. And they really contextualized some of the experiments from Eastern Europe and in terms of touch. And I just was like, oh, I was just like blown away. And I was just like, I loved that he kind of shattered this illusion, because I do think that there is yeah, around, well, it's a really larger discussion about contact improvisation and legacy, and where do things emerge from, and how do things arrive in a cultural moment. And then again, what's invisibilized from history, because in my dance training as a dance historian, even as just an undergrad and through an American university at very young, like we didn't learn much, you know, we had our canon. And so he really shattered some things around the canon for me, and it was really exciting. And so I'll never forget that. And then, so yeah, that was a really profound moment. And then to go back to this idea of speculation, and the idea that you could have a fiction, a fictitious choreographer. I mean, I don't know, you know, I don't know, maybe it has been, but how has that been done before? I don't know. I mean, people are putting on masks throughout, you know, centuries across, and thousands of years across cultures. But what is it to don a mask? You know, like she became almost like a mask, a persona that we could all take on. And then what does that afford? What kind of, I think the word fantasy came up a lot. How do you use your imagination? And so it afforded this different lines, again, like a rhizomatic way to look at history and time through many different cultural perspectives. And I think for everybody involved, it just kind of opened up really different kinds of creative doors that were really wonderful. And then I remember I went to the Tons Congress. Peter, you might have to tell me what year that was, 14 or 15, maybe you were there, in Berlin. And then was it one of the Gabrielas Brandstetter? Did she give her talk? Where was that? Is that? And she gave an opening talk as if she was Veronica Blumstein. And I was like, don't quote me on these years. I might have to edit this all out. But it was an interesting moment, because she gave a whole talk on Veronica. And so I was like, oh, I guess Veronica really did have this impact, even though these symposiums were weekends, you know, even though the research happened over a few years' time. But the depth of research for the artists and scholars involved, I think, opened up a lot of questions about history and memory, and if we all put on a costume, what does, like, the theatrics, I'm not a theater person, but that's how I imagine it, what does that afford us to explore in terms of reactivation and carrying forward traditions, or reinventing. I think it was all about reinvention, actually, now that I think about the word reinvention kept coming up. So it was great, really wonderful project.
It was truly wonderful, and it is, because she's still alive. And actually this question, is she alive? And this question about aliveness does resonate a lot with me as well. And I think it's really maybe my feeling, all this discourse and research we do, and strategies we imply around conservation, preservation, and reactivations, reimaginations, it actually all comes really to this one basic question: is it still alive? And how we can maintain the life within it. And I feel that like almost like a checkup, right? Is it still alive? Does it live for me? What is remembered lives, and what is transmitted that way. Also, even by this creative repetition, as you mentioned, more just took a score and created something out of it that actually maybe by standards of many definitions would not be a reenactment really, but in fact it was the only way the artist wanted her work to live, and it became alive again. That's actually, I think, a beautiful thing and a beautiful way to finish this, because it's not only Veronica is alive, but performance is alive. We are, and we will through the memory and through the transmitted materials. And I wanted here to thank you both and honor you both also for this long years of your practice and everything you did, for the living legacies of everything you have received that you passed on to the new generations. And I'm also feeling very privileged to be one that could learn from you and try to give it back as well to others. Thank you very much for this meeting. And I hope that this liveness that is in us and that we push forward will continue and stay with us forever.